Hello and welcome to yet another video. This is the 8th episode of the story where Madara devised a plan. The Yondaime ruined things. Madara devised another plan, one that could never fail. But even the best laid plans of mice and men can go awry, and this one had just run into Konoha's most surprising ninja, Uzumaki Naruto. This story is from Arun 2110. Please support him, her. Please like and subscribe to show your support. Let's get the show started. Peas kill everyone in grass down to the cats and dogs. Team 7 stared, blank looks etched on their faces. Sensei? Sakura asked. I want you three to go down to grass and reprise against their capital for what happened in T, Kakashi explained patiently. That's tens of thousands of people, Sasuke murmured aloud. Gazing around the room, he said, Sensei, we're your students. We've done everything you've ever asked us to do. But this. Destroying an entire city. This doesn't feel right. You're talking about primary targets being civilians and not soldiers or military infrastructure. And it won't even hurt Akatsuki as we've no proof that Kusa's been working with them. We'd be stooping to Akatsuki's level if we do that, and we're better than that. Isn't there something else we can do? I wish there were, Sasuke. I wish I didn't have to ask this of Naruto, but we have no other choice other than surrender. I understand you're asking Naruto to do this because you think that we need to demonstrate deterrence to avoid a repeat of T capital, Sensei, spoke Sakura, trying to reason with her superiors, but aren't you assuming that they can do an encore? We have no proof that assumption is right. We can't very well wait until they nuke another city for your proof, Sakura, Tsunade responded. We have to assume they have the capability, Shikaku appended. It is the only reasonable assumption. Else, why would they have wasted it on T capital? But. Sakura begun, but stopped as Naruto held up his hand to silence her. Sasuke and Sakura turned to face the blonde. He looked at them with a little smile shown on his face. Thanks for protecting me, guys, but I agree with Sensei. I know you do too. Sasuke snorted. He's asking you to become the greatest mass murderer in the history of the elemental nations, Naruto, he said. There were others who had stamped papers and sent nations at war, killing far more, but no one would personally have killed so many as Naruto would if he carried out the Godaime's request. T capital had some time to evacuate. Kusa won't. Kakashi Sensei, I didn't order you, idiot. He can't order you to do something like this. Refuse. Sasuke is correct on that count, Naruto. I'm not going to order you to do something like this, Kakashi said. But if I don't, the war is going to be lost, isn't it? Naruto asked in a quiet voice. Most probably, yes. I think there's a remote possibility that we can get IWA, Kumo, and even Akatsuki to the negotiating table, but we'll have to surrender and they'll expect massive concessions from us. Then surrender, Sasuke spoke with conviction. Threatening to burn a city down was one thing, but actually doing it? Sasuke wasn't that sort of madman, and neither was his teammates. No, Sasuke. IWA has driven too deep into our territory and are looking at outright victory if we don't hold them for the next few months. There is no reason for them to come to the negotiation table at this juncture, Shikaku retorted. Naruto laid a hand of Sasuke's shoulder. You know they're right, Sasuke. Let it drop. To Kakashi, his eyes roving at the people seated behind the table, he said with a sad smile, Jinchuriki, the power of human sacrifice, Sensei. Always and forever. So, what's one more sacrifice when there have been so many others? I'm sorry, Naruto, Kakashi replied, blinking away his tears. Signing the order was well and good, but the Godaime knew the price the execution would extract from his student. He would not have wished it on his worst enemy, but circumstances forced him to inflict such a fate on his children. I know you are, Sensei, but needs must when the devil drives. A pause. Can we win if I do this? I don't see the point of so much blood on my hand otherwise. Kakashi turned to Tsunade. If we can hold for 4 months, we'll be in a position to win or negotiate a peace, she said in a somber voice. Provided the other side doesn't burn out more of our cities, there are weapons we've developed that we can deploy on the IWA front in 4 months. With these new weapons and the reinforcements from the Kaze no Kuni and T fronts, we should be able to push them back to the border and beyond. Tsunade and Kabuto will give the 3 of you a tour, Kakashi ordered. Naruto can give us his decision once that is done. Can't we destroy Konoha like you did T? Deidara asked Pain before the other assembled Akatsuki members. Pain had called for an all-team meeting with the 4 surviving teams to discuss strategy and to finalize the plan to recruit 2 new members. Discussion on strategy had led to talk of the destruction of T and the fallout. Deidara, the explosives-crazed maniac, wanted in on the action and was firmly for destroying more cities in the High no Kuni sphere of influence. Toby hopped up and down. Madara had recently joined the organization overtly under the assumed persona of a powerful, brain-damaged idiot. Toby's a good boy, but senpai likes to kill puppies and kittens. Bad senpai. Deidara glared hatred and disgust at the orange-masked idiot. Enough, Pain intervened. We destroyed T to weaken High no Kuni and to destroy any chance for a negotiated peace between fire, earth and lightning. Further weakening fire by destroying their infrastructure is against that purpose. So we do nothing? Deidara asked, looking around. Yes. Soon enough, fire will be defeated. Earth and lightning will turn on each other over the spoils. We'll wait until the hiding places of the 1 and 2 tail become evident and capture them. Until then, we will improve our penetration of the villages and do nothing except making good the losses of Haiden and Kakuzu. Is that understood? Yes, leader. What is this? Naruto asked, pointing at a metal contraption mounted on a table in the center of the lab. Kabuto's and Tsunade's assistants had the machine open and were tinkering with it. This is the future of war, Kabuto, ever the showman, waved with a flourish. Okay. You don't believe me? The medic Nin asked. Yep. Sakura nodded. What does it do? Sasuke asked. It's a machine that mass-produces seals. In other words, a printer. We've had that for a long time, you know, Sakura said. And they definitely have not revolutionized warfare. What Sakura says. Printers are not a revolution. A shinobi is needed to expend the chakra to charge the printed seals, and that has always been the second bottleneck with the application of seals in war. Because no matter how fast you produce seals, they can't be used unless they're charged, and you need shinobi to charge them, Naruto instructed. Quite. With normal printers, that's the case. But this is different, Kabuto defended. Sasuke raised an eyebrow. How so? Do tell. This printer is mechanical engineering meets traditional fuinjutsu meets seals of power. Huh. This seals that are printed with this printer is different, you see. This printer has modified templates of the explosive seal, the genjutsu resistance seal and the chakra sensing seal. The modifications include a limited chakra storage mechanism that is rechargeable and a charging seal that draws ambient chakra to fill the chakra reservoir. Naruto, who understood the technical difficulties that had been overcome by the research team, stared lustily at the printer. Here was the holy grail of fuinjutsu that overcame the 2 traditional limitations of sealing, production rate and chakra charge. No longer would seal use be bottlenecked by the speed at which seal masters could write seals and the chakra capacity of the bearer to charge them. How did you get this done? He asked, flabbergasted. Slowly, painfully, and with a lot of trial, explosions, error and more explosions, Kabuto replied, smiling. Team 7 burst into laughter. I wish I had been there to see the research in process, Naruto said. As I understand it, you had more important things to do. Like capturing Jinchuriki, toppling unfriendly regimes, fighting insurgents and the like. Screw all that, Naruto said, emphatically. This is the stuff of history. Jiraiya Sensei is going to cream in his pants when he hears about this. I almost did. Sakura slapped Naruto on the back of his head. Cut the vulgarity, you idiot. Ah. Sakura-kun, you know I'm excited about seals. Is all. I know. To Kabuto, she said, I can see the printer's uses in war, but is it really a game changer? You know those anti-personnel fragmentation bombs that UANBU favor is forever constrained by the production rates of explosive seals. This machine overcomes that in one go, Kabuto explained. It'd work if the charging rate is fast enough, I suppose, Sakura conceded. What's the charging rate, by the way? Sasuke asked. Kabuto had the decency to look embarrassed. 7 weeks. And we don't ever see that coming down without increasing the tag size by a factor of 8. That slow? Explain again how exactly this stuff is going to revolutionize seal use in warfare? Sakura asked pointedly. Naruto glared at the researcher. Kabuto had lied and this wasn't the Holy Grail, after all. Well, a regular seal master can produce a maximum of 100 tags a day, right? Kabuto asked. Team 7 nodded. That was the world average except for a handful of freaks like Naruto. The blonde used Kage Bunshin to draw as many clones as he wanted. Was the time when there'd been a mighty interdepartmental fight between the ops and logistics at the height of the Tea insurgency over which department got their hands on him. This machine can print 8,000 a day every day, Kabuto said, proudly. Yeah, that'd change things, all right, Sakura murmured, shock evident in her voice. I guess that means logistics won't be rationing the use of the bombs all that much anymore. It's not just Shinobi. We've installed a release mechanism for the chakra that doesn't need chakra adepts to activate it, and don't even ask me how hard that was. I swear I aged a couple of decades before we overcame that technical hurdles. You mean anyone can use these tags? Anyone from the lowest recruit to the highest adept. Wow. So I guess you'll be productionizing this printer in 2 months? Sasuke asked, remembering Tsunade's 4-month milestone for winning the war. Kabuto chuckled and shook his head. No. Production line for the seal started 2 weeks back and we've had 3 operational for the last week. Unfortunately, they have a tendency to break down frequently, teething problems, you understand, and that one over there is under repair. There are plans to build a 4th and a 5th so that we'll have availability levels of 60+%. In 2 months, we'll have enough bombs for 1 division of samurai at projected rate of use plus 30%. In 3, we'll have enough for 2.5 divisions. Naruto looked to his friends. I guess that means the mission to Kusa is go. Sasuke and Sakura reluctantly nodded. Itachi. Kisame. The 2 Akatsuki members stepped forward. Yes, leader, Itachi asked. He was the de facto leader of their little team. Kisame preferred to stay in the background except when there was murdering to be done. I want your team to go to Kusa. You will handle the pickup from our agent at the regular drop point. You will also track the Toad Sannin's group that is operating behind IWA lines and observe them in action. The situation is fluid, so I'm wary of giving further orders as that might rob you of the flexibility of response. So, I'll give you your mission objectives and constraints. Improvement of supply situation for Iwa's invasion forces in Hai no Kuni. Mission constraints: if IWA can handle the problem themselves, then don't bother with intervention. Else, intervene the hell out of the situation. Bear in mind that we don't want Jiraiya's group utterly destroyed, however. Itachi nodded. It'll be done. I'm sorry again, Naruto, Kakashi said. He had his hands on Naruto's shoulders and was looking into the blonde's eyes as he spoke. "Wasn't a thing you could do about this, sensei," Naruto replied, solemnly. "My life and my sacred honor for my country and my village." Kakashi nodded and hugged the blondes. "Good luck," he addressed all 3 members of Team 7. "Remember your instructions. We need the world to know who's responsible for Kusa's destruction." "Yes, sensei," Sakura said, not quite glaring at her teacher. She wanted to choke the Godame for what he'd asked off Naruto. Naruto silently summoned a toad and crawled into its wide-open mouth. Sasuke and Sakura followed him without a word or a look back at their teacher. Kakashi sighed once the toad had jumped into the well and vanished. He hoped his students would find it in their hearts to forgive him for the thing, but there wasn't much chance for it. God, how he cursed the Sandaime and Jiraiya for burdening him with the thankless job of leading the village. "Well, here we are," Naruto said, gesturing at the countryside and pointing east. "Kusagakure is 6 hours that way. Couldn't you have jumped in closer?" Sasuke asked. Naruto thanked his toad friend with a gift of chocolate. After the summon vanished, he turned to his friends. "I could have, but I'm not in a hurry to earn the title of mass-murdering bastard, Yuke." "You could still refuse the mission, Naruto." "And how many of our friends and countrymen will die if I do, Sakura?" "But we've had this conversation before and this is the only sure way." A pause. "God, I wish I didn't have to do it, but there ain't a choice." "There's a choice, Naruto," Sasuke commented. "But since you're too stubborn and pig-headed to change your mind, you're going to carry out Kakashi-sensei's mad order." "Yeah, I suppose I am. Let's go." As they sprinted toward their objective, Sakura kept glancing worriedly at her friend. Damn Kakashi-sensei for making Naruto do this. She waited until their first break before she tried once more. Naruto had his clones out patrolling and guarding the approaches to their campsite that afternoon, and Team 7 was as reasonably secure in enemy country as possible. "Naruto." Naruto looked up, but Sasuke interjected himself between them. "If you're going to try again to make him quit, Sakura, forget it," the Uchiha said. "He's not going to change his mind." "That doesn't mean I can't try," she retorted hotly. Then, in a quieter, despairing voice, "What else can I do, Sasuke? This is not something where you shrug your shoulders, buckle down and live with." "I know," the Uchiha replied, radiating calm and meeting her challenge, "but he's not going to stop and I don't see any point in trying to persuade him otherwise. I understand you're angry because he has to bear this burden alone and you won't. So am I." Sakura remained silent and petulant. "So let's ensure he won't have to bear all the burden. Let's support him in every way we can. Okay?" Silence. "Are you with me?" Sasuke tried again. Yeah. I'm with you." "And okay." Sasuke nodded and turned to Naruto. "So, how are we going to do this?" he asked. "I hadn't thought that far ahead," the blonde confessed. "I'd avoided thinking that far ahead actually. You know charging in without a plan will get you killed, Naruto. Kusagakure's going to be crawling with Kusa and Iwa Shinobi as it's the invasion's major supply and staging point on this side of the border." Naruto stared. "I know," he mumbled. Sakura shook her head and pulled out the Kusagakure map they'd been provided. "Idiot. I guess it's up to Sasuke and I to keep you alive since you can't be bothered." Sasuke nodded. "You're going to need to be airborne or stand at a high enough point to target the city center," he said, tapping 3 hills on the map bordering the eastern and southern borders of the city. "That means we'll have to take one of these 3 hills overlooking the city. I prefer the eastern one. It's 1,200 feet above ground level and is located 2 kilometers from the city border. Further, it's furthest from Konoha's borders and the approach from the city is difficult. Will give us time to assault, take over, set up defense and let Naruto do his thing. All valid points, Sasuke agreed, but see, the approach from our side isn't all that good either. So? Sakura asked. The way I see it, it actually works out in our favor. How? The guards won't be watching this phase too closely even if they're alert. Intelligence from before the war had it that duty posts the hills were assigned to unruly troops as punishment. We have to remember that the first-rate units will be on the front line with the invasion force. The guards on the mountain will be third-rate paratroopers with all the baggage it implies. Point. Once we reach the base of the hill, you and I will lead from the assault from the front. Naruto will bring up the rear. As soon as the top is cleared, we'll find the tallest point with a clear line of sight to the city and fortify while Naruto does his thing. You're going to need 10 minutes, aren't you, Naruto? Sasuke asked. Naruto nodded. On average, yes. Better make it 20 minutes then. Wiser to have a buffer than not, Sasuke said. Think we can handle the rabble for 20 minutes, Sasuke? Sakura asked, flint in her eyes. Shouldn't be a problem. Let's eat and rest. We're 2 hours from the capital now. If we start at around 0130 HRS in the night, we should have plenty of time to reach the target and carry out our plan. The hill loomed before Team 7. Clouds obscured the stars and the moon, and it was utterly dark. Ordinary eyes would have been mostly blind, but Sasuke had his Sharingan and Sakura had her own special techniques for seeing in the dark. Naruto had something just as good in his sage. Techniques. Sakura held up her hand, 3 fingers extended and closed them one by them. When she'd formed a fist, she brought it down and Team 7 assaulted up the slopes, nimbly navigating the hazard posed by assorted rocks, boulders, trees, shrubs and whatnot. And though they could have reached the top of the hill in a couple of minutes if they'd went as fast as they could under present conditions, they took their time and paced their climb so as to be as fresh as possible when they reached the summit. Sasuke reached the hilltop first. He crouched behind a waist-high boulder, waiting for the kunoichi to join him. He scanned the area with his eyes, scanning for enemy patrols or guards at their posts. Naruto and Sakura joined him as he conducted his search. Report, Sakura whispered, taking position directly behind the Uchiha. Sasuke shook his head in wonder. I don't believe it. There are 10 of them and they're all asleep. There are no guards or patrols. God save us all from paratroopers. Be glad theirs are as bad as ours, Sakura retorted. It was the horrible state of readiness of garrison troops on the Kusa border that had allowed Iwa Kusa alliance to advance so far so fast during their initial attack. To Naruto, she said, give us a couple of minutes and we'll clear the rabble. Come once one of us give the all-clear signal. Naruto nodded and his teammates sprung into action. Jiraiya finished reading the message from Konoha, anger mounting. He broke the scroll over his knee, threw it down and stomped on it for good measure. That miserable SOB, he seethed. I'm going to wring his neck when I get back to Konoha. Jiraiya-sama, the XO asked. The toad Sannin ground his teeth and took a deep breath to calm himself. This wasn't the place to lose one's temper. Not in the middle of enemy territory with his subordinates around. But he promised himself he would have words with Kakashi as soon as he got back. I'm all right, XO, he said. Just received a bit of unpalatable news from home, is all. Yes, sir. Gather the troops. There's a change of orders. We won't be engaging the Jinchuriki, after all. Sir. Something else is being done to deal with the situation on this front in a more permanent manner, Jiraiya explained, stooping to pick up the scroll. He lit the document with a fire technique and watched it intently as it burned to ash. Yes, sir. Bring me a map. We're going to change our disposition and reorient for engaging troops retreating from the front. The XO looked blankly. Our beloved Godame, Jiraiya bit out his explanation, has sent an unit to assault and inflict massive damages on Kusagakure. That scroll was an advisory instructing us of our new mission. We're going to be ambushing the enemy troops as they retreat to their rear. I'll get right on it, sir. Thank you. Dismissed, Jiraiya waved. There would be hell to pay once he got back to Konoha, but until then, there was the present and the immediate future to fight and survive. The 10 Kusa troops had died quietly without ever waking up from their sleep. The genjutsu that Sakura had laid on them had been so powerful that none had raised a cry as the two-leaf nin methodically slit their throats one by one. Afterwards, it was a simple matter of dumping 2 of the bodies and the mattresses from their bunks. Sasuke had carried the cheap wooden cots up to the roof and set them up on the wall overlooking the city. "You're set, Naruto," Sasuke announced. "Better move some distance then," the blonde replied, focused on his task. He pulled the tools of this job out. The first scroll one had 1 kilogram of common salt. The second scroll had specially made rubber ball filled with water with 100 liters of heavy water, D2O. The third scroll was filled with seals that Naruto needed to control the process while he was powering the weapon. Sasuke and Sakura retreated about 100 yards away to Naruto's left and right. They'd been around the blonde while he was creating the technique and knew well enough to keep the hell away. Naruto verified they were both safely away and then started the long drawn-out process by creating the 7 clones he'd need to control and aim the bomb. The clones arranged the salt in the designated circle on the third scroll and placed the water ball on top. Then, they took their positions. Naruto sat before the control scroll, placed both his hands on the proper positions and started pumping chakra. His mind was focused inward in meditation. The procedure was dangerous enough without a wandering attention to complicate things. Fortunately, he had a lot more control and understanding of the process than in the old days when he'd have slit his own throat rather than use a clone to power the process. "What the fuck is that?" one of the guards on the western gate of Kusagakure's wall asked his team leader, pointing at the bright flashes of blue, green, pink and other assorted colors on top of Fido Hill. The Jounin shrugged. "Damned if I know, Dato. The assholes on duty are probably having a party and setting things on fire or playing with their chakra. They've got Nasu with them today and God knows what runs through that screw-up's mind most days." "You think so, sir?" Dato asked uncertainly. His commander shrugged again. "Could be. Still, I better get on the radio and ask those goons to quit while they're ahead. If this gets back to the watch commander, they're for it." "Yes, sir." The theory of matter-energy equivalence was well established by theoretical scientists for over 4 decades. But no one had ever bothered to explore this particular avenue of research because there was no way to capitalize on its implications either militarily or economically. That hadn't stopped Naruto, however. His interest in explosives had been piqued by the power of the improvised explosive device he'd used against Tsuna's Jinchuriki. Further, he had good teachers in Jiraiya, Kabuto, Tsunade and Sandaime who'd guided and channeled his curiosity into productive avenues. Still, knowledge alone isn't enough. Theory needs a knowledge implemented in a machine, or a weapon, in this specific instance, to be put into practice. Mechanics wasn't Naruto's forte and anyways, the elemental nations lacked the mechanical know-how to create a device that used fusion. But Naruto knew seals and he had chakra in plenty. Most important of all, he had the use of Kage Bunshin to learn by trial and error. And there had been a hell of a lot of errors. 200 square kilometers of territory was pockmarked with craters caused by his failures and was pretty much uninhabitable. But where others would have failed and been vaporized by their failures, he had lived to learn from his mistakes and he had succeeded beyond his wildest imagination and harnessed the power of atoms. "Sir, I don't think it's a party," Dato informed his superior. The latter worthy was fiddling with the radio and cursing undisciplined, drunken idiots and not paying attention to their job. Sir? Dato repeated. Yes, the Jounin turned to Dato and followed his subordinate's hand, which was pointed towards the hill. The psychedelic light show had stopped. In its place, there was one single light powerful enough to light the night sky and shine like a day on the hilltop. What the? The idea was simple. A high enough pressure, and the temperature regime in such an environment, or just plain high enough temperature is enough to cause fusion in hydrogen. Naruto had first mixed the water with salt, centrifuged the mixed in rubber and dust particles. Then, he'd ionized and heated the mass with fire and lightning contained in a gigantic Rasengan to hydrolyze the water molecules. He'd followed that with compression to increase the pressure massively and fed energy to heat up the cocktail. Control, loads and loads of it, was required to hold the plasma together, and for that, there were 6 clones and the seal array. Energy leaked, even so, and the discharged ions had been the source of the pretty lights that had spooked Dato. But finally, the process was complete. Naruto slowly stood up. He wasn't needed to feed energy anymore, and he wanted as far from the bomb as he could. Sasuke, Sakura, behind the hill. This is going to be messy, he shouted, even as he ran down the slope. Once all 3 were safely hid, or so they hoped, Naruto shouted to his clones to shoot the bomb. The 7th clone stepped forward, aimed and shot the ball at Kusagakure. This was arguably the most dangerous step of the process, because the ball of plasma was on the edge of fusion and barely under control. To Naruto's relief, containment did not fail. Approximately 500 yards from ground level and 230 yards from the city center, the ball destabilized with a temperature spike as the containment field collapsed. 10 grams of matter were converted into energy that was the equivalent of approximately 215 kilotons of TNT. Kusa had a diameter between 4 and 8 kilometers. The center of the city ceased to exist. The rest of the city did not fare much better as the explosion started a firestorm that within the day saw practically every building burn to ashes. The buildings had been proofed against fires with seals, of course, but the temperature of the explosion as well as the firestorm were above the threshold of civilian seals, and everything that could burn, burned. The death toll was sky-high and trending upwards. Sasuke and Sakura worked at the base of the hill, etching up Konoha-owned Kusa's message on the hillside that was phrased differently. Naruto didn't join them. He was lost in his own nightmares. "I wish I had died than caused this obscenity," Naruto whispered as he watched the city burn on his knees from the building's rooftop. "Oh, I wish I had never been born." Naruto. The blonde sat silently on one of the cots staring blankly. Flies buzzed around the entrance of the building even as a swarm filled the interior. They'd been attracted to the corpses inside. Sasuke put a hand on his shoulder and gently shook him. "Dawn's here, Naruto. We have to leave." Naruto continued to stare and said nothing. Sasuke bit his lips. Naruto had collapsed on the building roof where he'd fired his technique soon after the explosion. The figurative blood on his hands had overcome him and he'd shut down. He hadn't spoken or responded to anything since and had to be carried down by his teammates. "We have to leave, and in the state he's in, we're not going to be using Toad," the Uchiha said, gesturing at his friend. "But where do we go from here?" Sakura asked. "Not Konoha for sure. I don't want to see Kakashi-sensei right now." Sakura nodded, rolling out a map of the elemental nations. "Quite. That leaves linking up with Jiraiya-sensei. We'll have to track him down behind enemy lines in the middle of a freaking war. At least, we know his unit's general area of operations. That's well over 1,000 square kilometers of area," Sakura pointed out. "We'd better start. You carry him for the first leg. I don't think he'll walk. Be alert. Every SOB within 50 miles is making a beeline for Kusa right now. Which is why you're going to carry him. We need to put some distance between ourselves and the city. Jiraiya saw the sky light up in the early hours of the morning and knew the thing was done. He hadn't slept well and had gotten up early to gaze at the northern skies. Sparing a prayer to the gods to keep his godson and his friends alive, he set about composing a message for Kakashi. The Yondaime needed to be informed of the successful detonation, and hopefully, the destruction of Kusa, at the earliest. "Did you see that light up north? I wonder what that was about," someone spoke loudly enough to reach Jiraiya's ears. Jiraiya ignored the exchange and focused on his writing. He would call a meeting and inform his team of the light's significance after sunrise. Right now, his people needed their sleep. Kusa's destroyed, Zetsu informed Pain, Konan and Madara. The city blew up in a massive explosion. "Destroyed?" Konan asked, shooting looks at the other two. "What happened?" "I don't know." The Zetsu that was observing the city could not tell. "How much of the city survives?" Madara asked. Then, he posed the far more important question from his point of view: what is the status of the invasion supply depot? If Kusa was destroyed, then Nagato's actions in T would be for naught. The balance would once again shift to the middle, and that wasn't good for his end goals. The city's totaled. Very few houses were left standing and mostly on the periphery, and there's a crater where the center of the city used to be. The depot was caught in the explosion as well. It's not outright destroyed, but there'd be significant loss of inventory. We have to assume it was an attack until proven otherwise, Nagato said. Who has the capability to do such a thing? Konan asked. Other than Akatsuki, I mean. Konoha's the obvious suspect. Kusa was very high on their shit list, and if they had the capability, they would want a counter-demonstration to T, Madara pointed out. Was it Tailed Beast Bomb? Nagato asked. If it had been, the Zetsu would have felt the chakra. He said he was lucky to have been facing away from the blast when it happened, or he would have been blinded. Zetsu shrugged. Provided you were close enough, Nagato corrected. What manner of weapon works on that scale without using chakra? Madara wondered aloud. Are we wrong in assuming Konoha's involved somehow? Let's not be too quick to rule out Leaf's involvement, and let's leave the mechanism of the explosion aside for the present. Zetsu, where was your observation post? There's a hill about 5 kilometers west of the city walls. The clone was using that since it overlooked road used to move supplies and Shinobi to the depot from IWA. Was anyone else on your hill? The Kusa garrison was, of course. There was no one else. Are there any other high grounds close to the city? If this were an attack, it was either a suicide run or someone had to have struck from somewhere high to be sure of hitting the city center. There are 3 hills closer to the city that overlook another set of roads that connect to Hai no Kuni. All hills have observation posts on them, though the quality of the garrisons is very bad. Anything else that could be serve the purpose? No. Have the other scout the 3 hills. If this was a deliberate attack, there should have traces left behind. What if the attack had come from the air? Konan asked. You suspect IWA, Madara stated. No, I don't think they have anything to gain from wiping out Kusa at this juncture. Maybe after Konoha had been defeated, but not before. But they do have that flying technique, and the attack may have been launched from the air. That is a remote possibility. Those techniques are closely guarded. But what one man invents, another can discover. Someone else may have figured out a way to replicate it. True, Nagato agreed, but if they were using flight and Zetsu hadn't caught them, then there's no hope we'll find the culprit. Still, I don't think we should close the door on a natural calamity, Madara stated. I quite agree. What are the usual suspects? Volcano and asteroid, Konan enumerated. If it was a volcano, it was unlike any other, and it's possible it was an asteroid, Zetsu noted. Konan shot a look at Nagato. Asteroids could be natural or artificial. You don't mean another Rinnegan user? Nagato asked, looking disturbed. It sounded impossible, but what had happened once could happen again. So, why shouldn't there be another Rinnegan user? Only, if there was one and that person was acting against Akatsuki, things were going to get real dicey real fast. Why not? Conan asked. Why not indeed, Madara punctuated. Was there another path to Rinnegan than through the Sharingan? Then, shaking his head, he said, this is getting us nowhere. Let us not get ahead of ourselves here, Zetsu cautioned. Let my other self complete his search and report. Yes. Let's. Naruto's technique seems to have worked, Shikaku mused. The Godame's War Council had gathered for a meeting and Kakashi had shared Jiraiya's communique with them. It would be helpful if we had confirmation from Naruto, Tsunade said. Kakashi nodded, absent-mindedly. Anything on your mind, Kakashi? The medic Nin asked. I was thinking about my children. No reason why we shouldn't have received their message. You're worried something went wrong? Yeah. I'm worried. I'm sure nothing's happened to them, Kakashi. Even if something has, you can't help them from here. Best thing to do is to put them out of your mind for now. We have work to do and a war to oversee. Kakashi sighed and leaned back on his chair. You're correct, of course. Where were we? I was saying it would be better if we had confirmation from Naruto before we proceed, Tsunade said. Do we need the confirmation? Shikaku asked. Inoichi looked at his friend quizzically. Don't we? We can tell from Jiraiya's report that the weapon is extremely powerful. It must be for the detonation to be seen so far away. It appears to be more powerful than any tailed beast bomb we've ever heard. It's clearly more powerful than the technique the Rinnegan user used on T-Capital, the Nara strategist explained. So who cares if Kusa survived the explosion or not? We have demonstrated that we have the ability to strike deep within enemy territory and that our weapon is to be feared like no other. You make some very valid points, Kakashi agreed. He still looked dull, but was no longer lost in his worries. But we need Naruto to repeat it. And we appear to have lost contact with him, Inoichi pointed out, shooting Kakashi an apologetic look. Addressing the Godame specifically, he said, I'm sorry, Hokage-sama. I'm sure he's fine, but we have to consider the worst. Kakashi nodded, numbly. We'd be in a hopeless position if he's lost, Tsunade noted, shooting an apology at Kakashi herself. Shikaku shook his head and leaned forward to rest his hands on the desk. Not necessarily, he said, we'd be in a hopeless position if Naruto's lost and it got out we can't replicate his technique. Inoichi nodded. You suggest we should posture as if we could. Yes. But not too strongly. Of course. What do you suggest we should do, Shikaku? Tsunade asked. We need to compose a message to IWA and send it at the earliest. Let us avoid talking about the plight of Kyuzugaku since we don't have confirmation that the technique was used over the city. We will instead focus on the power of our weapon. Let them assume it was a demonstration if the weapon had missed the city, or let them tremble in fear at the destruction of that well-defended city in one strike. Either way, let them know terror. We will categorically state that the technique is reusable and we are very much prepared to use on however many cities we need to if they dare strike against another one of ours. Sounds good. We'll add that we expect IWA to exert control over Akatsuki to our formal communication to the Tsuchikage and his daimyo. Yes. And once we get confirmation of the attack as well as Kyuzugaku's fate, we'll go public with our own people, proclaiming this as a great victory for the cause of justice, liberty and freedom. We should send messengers to the claimants to the daimyo throne in Hai no Kuni as well. A subtle threat to them to mend their ways, Inoichi added. I like that, Ibiki said, speaking for the first time in the meeting and sporting a ghastly smile on his face. I really like that. Tsuchikage-sama, there's an emergency. It was late afternoon, but Sandaime Tsuchikage Inoki looked up from his work, sleep written on his face. He'd put in another all-nighter yesterday, to cope with the ever-increasing amounts of administrative paperwork and assimilate the reports from the battlefront. As a result, he was tired, bleary-eyed and cranky. "What is it?" he asked with a yawn. "It's Kusagakure, sir," the aide said, sounding pensive. The Tsuchikage's shoulders slumped. As an enemy, grass had been a pain in Iwa's ass for as long as he could remember. One would expect the relationship and disposition to improve once stone and grass became friends. In this case, one would be wrong. Kusa, the ally, was an even bigger pain in the ass with daily demands for money, resources, and whatnot. Frequently, Inoki wondered how Konoha had tolerated the pompous nation for so long. What are they complaining about now? Have their ambassador wait while I'm freshening up. Tell him I'm in a meeting in the meanwhile. It's not their ambassador, Tsuchikage-sama. Then who is it? No one. There's a high-priority message from Kusagakure. Inoki shook his head. He needed to get another aide and fire this one for not getting to the point. Well, get on with it. Kusagakure's gone, sir. What do you mean, gone? The city's destroyed in a gigantic explosion. So are most of our supplies stockpiled on the outskirts for the war effort. The Tsuchikage blinked. Was there an attack? The message mentions no alarm. Our people at the scene suspect an accident or sabotage. The Tsuchikage worried a tooth and feeling thirsty, poured himself a glass of water. He downed it in one gulp and turned to his aide. Give me the message, he said, stretching out his arm. Yes, sir, the aide said, offering the decoded scroll. A minute passed as the Sandaime Tsuchikage read and digested the very sparse report. So, to summarize this, he waved the scroll. We don't know what happened to cause the explosion, the magnitude of which seems to have been many orders more than a Bijamari, and we don't know whether foul play is involved. Our people have started an investigation, but know nothing for certain. They're also assisting the survivors fight the firestorm that's raging through the ruins of the city. The death toll appears to be even greater than T capitals, and the optimistic estimation is that more than half the supplies stored at our depot were lost. Precious little of the city survives, so we've lost troops who'd been pulled from the front line and were being billeted in hotels and apartments there. Yes, sir. The city was supposed to be proofed against fire with suppressant seals. How then this firestorm? Don't know, sir. I'll ask our people to investigate it. Good. Send a message to the senior officer on the ground to do an inventory of our supplies and submit a report on the viability of conducting offensive operations or defending our acquisitions within fire. In the meanwhile, send a movement alert to our troops on the front line with orders to hold and not mount any further offensive operations until further notice. If we can supply the invasion, we can stand down later, but if not, I'd like to get our boys out ASAP. The aide nodded and took note. Cancel all meetings for the day. Summon the Kusagakure ambassador. And the council. We'll have a strategy meeting in 3 hours. Hopefully, by that time, we'll have a clearer picture of the situation. I'll be resting and don't want to be disturbed in the meanwhile. Yes, sir. Dismissed. Itachi and Kisame had crossed the border and infiltrated Kusa when they received the call from Akatsuki HQ. They found a quiet spot and called home with their rings, which were marvels of the highest order of sealing techniques. Leader Sama, Itachi and Kisame reporting as ordered, Itachi thought. Momentarily, pain entered the conversation. So did Zetsu. Itachi. Kisame. Your mission has changed. What are the new mission parameters? There's been an explosion over Kusagakure. Zetsu is investigating. You're to rendezvous with him and lend him your assistance. Further, you will try to ascertain the nature of the weapon used and report back. Can't Kusa Shinobi investigate? Why are we hand-holding them? Kisame thought, irritably. He had better things to do than this sort of make work. As of sunrise this morning, Kusagakure has ceased to exist, came the biting reply. Are your orders clear? Yes, Leader Sama, Kisame thought back. Good. If the explosion was caused by Kusa's enemies, track down the guilty parties. Capture them if possible so that we may learn the secrets of the weapon or kill them. Yes, Leader Sama. Zetsu, coordinate with Itachi and Kisame. Yes. The connection cut out and Kisame turned to Itachi. I put my foot in it, didn't I? He asked. Itachi nodded. Kisame laughed light-heartedly. What do you suppose happened to Kusa? The swordsman asked, trying to start a conversation with his partner. We don't have anything to form a hypothesis. Too true. But I bet Leaf is responsible. Itachi nodded. He'd wanted to kill Pain ever since he learnt of the Sandame's assassination and the attack on T. The strike endangered the two things he held dear in his heart of hearts, his village and his brother. But killing Pain was pointless so long as Madara and Akatsuki survived. And since Itachi wasn't powerful enough to handle Madara, Pain and the other members of Akatsuki together, he'd controlled his fury and chose to exercise patience. The news of Kusa's destruction was reward enough for his tolerance. It meant that Hai no Kuni's cause wasn't hopeless. They're the obvious suspects, he agreed. It must be the nine-tailed Jinchuriki that did it, which means your brother is involved. Possibly, Itachi agreed again. Kisame's arguments were reasonable. Aren't you excited about the chance to meet your brother, Itachi-san? Kisame asked with a gruff laugh. I bet he's eager to meet you. We will see. Changing the subject, he said, I wonder what Leader Sama meant by capturing the perpetrators to learn the secrets of the technique. If my stupid little brother's teammate is involved, it was a tailed beast bomb and that is a very crude technique. The only requirement is that one be a Jinchuriki. Maybe the boy learned to alter it some? Kisame ventured. Perhaps. Sasuke gulped down the water from his canteen and once his thirst was satiated, handed it to Sakura. He'd made Naruto drink some already. This is thirsty work, he spoke aloud, wiping his mouth on his sleeve. No question about it, Sakura agreed. Wish we could have taken one of the regular trails. We daren't in the condition Naruto's in. You're right, of course. But cross-country carrying Naruto isn't a walk in the park. Better this than having him or us buying the farm, Sasuke. You can rest for a while if you want. I'll keep watch. Yeah. Just hope we catch with Jiraiya Sensei soon. Me, too. Anoki was one very Kage this evening. He glared at his aide and intel head in equal measure. What do you mean the fire suppressant seals were bogus? He asked angrily. It seems the vast majority of seals supplied to the civilian houses were fakes, Tsuchikajessima, the intel head reported calmly. Our people assisting the rescue and firefighting efforts in Kusagakure have confirmed this with numerous grass shinobi. Explain. This is what we believe happened. As you know, Kusa was a client state of Hai no Kuni and received a large sum of monies yearly from Fire to maintain their status as an ally. This allowed Kusa's military commanders and civilian leaders to live lavishly while the going was good. In the last few years, with Fire Country heavily committed on multiple fronts and preparing for war, the baksheesh levels plummeted. Since Kusa's command wasn't willing to compromise on their lifestyle, they compromised on their defense and the fire suppressant seals, which have to be annually replaced with new ones, were the first to go. Apparently, they installed the genuine stuff on their military installations and sold genuine ones to the civilians. Anoki shook his head. That is bad. Our people have been encountering similar issues when doing combined operations with their Kusa counterparts. It's just that, before this firestorm, no one paid any attention to it. It's the way of things among the client states, after all. I knew they have been having financial problems from the way their ambassador always whinges about money, but I did not think it was that bad. Yes, Tsuchikage-sama. So, for the want of a few honest men, our war against the pricks in fire hangs in the balance. Anoki shook his head. Sometimes I wonder whose side God is on. As Zetsu emerged out of the ground in a cluster of trees and rocks 100 yards from the hill summit, the sweet swell of ripening man-flesh hit his nostrils. Yum, dinner served. Zetsu scanned the area for chakra signatures, but detecting none that were large enough to indicate an adept, he cautiously climbed the mountain and entered the observation post. The closer he got, the stronger the scent of bodies in the initial stages of decay. It made him discover 10 bodies inside the building with slit throats and peaceful expressions on their fly-covered faces. 2 were sprawled haphazardly, but it did not take a genius to tell those ninja had been killed in their sleep and their bodies dumped because someone needed their cots. A few minutes of search found the cots on the building roof. Zetsu verified the attackers had been 3 in number and noted the clear line of sight from the roof to the ruined city. His senses told him that the chakra used here had been unique, a mix of human and nature, and enough had been used to leave an indelible mark on the wood of the cot. So, the attackers had used this position to fire their technique at the city, but there did not seem to be nearly enough chakra expended to account for the magnitude of the explosion. Something had to explain the discrepancy and Zetsu meant to find out. He got down on his knees to smell the wood and that was when he noted the salt and pieces of rubber on the cot and the ground. What does salt and rubber have to do with an explosion? Anoki opened his scroll and with a muffled cough, reached for his brush. "Let's get the meeting started, shall we?" he said. "What's on the itinerary?" "We're to discuss the supply situation for the invasion, the state of Kusa and the message from Konoha," the aide replied. "All right," Anoki said, looking pointedly at his head of logistics. "Do we have an update from Kusa on the supply situation?" "An incomplete one, Tsuchikage-sama." The Sandaime nodded. "Go on. I'll list our status on various items. There's bound to be some error here, because these are estimates, but we can assume that most of these line items are accurate within a 10% margin of error. We've lost 80% of rations stockpiled at the depot. This will not affect our troops terribly in the short run because we have 15 days of rations stockpiled close to the front as part of our preparations for an offensive on Konoha proper. Moreover, our people can forage to some limited extent. We've lost roughly 3/4 of our medical herb stores. This is going to have a major impact on our casualty rates once the stocks on the front run out. Our stock of explosive tags and various seal arrays appears to be largely unharmed at this point. Chakra pill stores are also intact. The inventories of kunai, shuriken, wires, sandals, uniforms, etc. are hit to various extents. They're still in the process of inventorying the loss and damage figures. Worst-case estimation is our troops will be wearing tattered uniforms and be stuck using somewhat inaccurate kunai and shuriken for the next 4 or 5 months while our production catches up with the losses. The major donkey stable was caught in the periphery of the blast with few survivors. So, turnaround times for supplying units on the front is going to shoot sky high until we can make good the losses. This is obviously the biggest issue. What are your suggestions? Anoki asked. Seize donkeys and mules from merchant caravans for the present. Approach Aim and Kaze no Kuni to see if they will sell us their beasts for an acceptable price. And what price do you deem acceptable? The daimyo's liaison asked. The quartermaster shrugged. We don't get the donkeys, we'll have to pull 3 regiments from the front. The liaison nodded. Your advice then? Anoki asked. Supplies at the front will be constrained for 2 months while we make good our losses of the beasts of burden. I don't advocate retreat at this time. We can curtail our offensive operations for the time being, though it will give fire time to prepare their positions. Anoki made a note on his scroll. So be it, he said aloud. To his head of intelligence, he asked, the state of Kusa? Kusa is a net liability for us from henceforth. They have lost their city, their chain of command, and by our best estimates, 50% of their total force. The influx of about 15,000 refugees from the city to the rest of the country is going to cause law and order problems as well. We'll have to take care of that. It looks like we'll avert a civil war because most of their troops are on the front lines, but we don't know how long we can keep them there. They have no reason to remain there other than revenge. Even that is not going to be enough because those men and women are going to want to return to hunt for their surviving kith and kin. Further, there's the issue of pay, in that, their paymasters are pushing up daisies right now. What can we do? We can institute a program to hunt the survivors ourselves and reunite them with their family members on the front or elsewhere. We can also pay them directly ourselves. Inoki nodded thoughtfully. I can see us doing it for the duration of this war. We'll pay them at their standard rates and not at ours. We'll send instructions to our commanders to use up the grass neen because I don't want a nation full of blooded veterans without leaders on our border once the conflict ends. Yes, Tsuchika-jessama. I'm glad that's settled, the Sandaime said. Looking over his shoulder at his aide, he said, now, the issue of Konoha's message. Chunin Yuto, could you read the communiqué aloud for us? I urge the rest of the members to hold their comments until the full message is read. The aide nodded and read, to our honorable cousin, the Sandaime Tsuchikage and his lord and master, the daimyo of Tsuchi no Kuni, the turmoil between our nations has been long and bitter, stretching back decades. But through those many years and the many wars we'd fought, our armies have always respected the laws of war. Samurai killed samurai and ninja killed ninja in our conflicts. There has never been an incident where either your nation or mine targeted civilian population centers as targets in and of itself. And glad were we all for it because it meant our wars were fought honorably and our families were safe at home. Sadly, in the current conflict, the laws of war have been broken. The capital of T, which our daimyo claims domain, was attacked in a cowardly manner. Civilians were targeted with murderous intent and thousands upon thousands killed mercilessly while they were being evacuated. The agent of this act is the rogue organization, Akatsuki, which has your support. Perhaps they thought we are weak and could not defend ourselves. We waited for your condemnation of their blatant violation of the laws of war, but you did not do it. So, here we stand. Hai no Kuni has carried out a demonstration of a weapon in our arsenal in the land of Kusa that is as powerful as the one used by Akatsuki to level T capital. We are not defenseless and we are prepared to retaliate for the destruction of our cities. For every one of ours that is destroyed henceforth, we will destroy 2 of yours and your allies. We implore you to restrain the rogue organization Akatsuki. The war they want and the war we will give you if you and they continue down your present path will have no victors. The Godaime Hokage. Your thoughts? Inoki asked. The meeting dissolved into chaos. At AIM Capital, Conan served a cup of piping hot tea to Madara, who savored a sip and nodded in her direction. The masked leader of Akatsuki was very particular about his tea. Pain, who was the other participant of this meeting, did not care for tea. He liked hot sake and his first bowl was still half full. She would probably have to dump the cooled contents and fetch him another. I'm concerned, Madara said, returning the teacup to the table. He pushed the cup in Conan's direction and picked up a report he'd brought with him to the meeting. The situation in Kusa? Pain asked. The explosion that had destroyed hidden grass had been confirmed to be nuclear in origin. It had poisoned the land and ruined the supplies that survived the initial explosion. It had also driven 6 shinobi who'd been rushed into the area for the rescue and reclamation effort. Many of those poor folk had died a horrible death. As a result, a bare 2 weeks after the initial explosion, IWA and Kusa forces had retreated back into Kusa's border, abandoning their gains in Hai no Kuni. It was either that or die on the vine at that point. That's one concern, yes, Madara responded, but that's not all. It's unfortunate that IWA had to pull back and let up on Konoha. It's even more unfortunate that Win's idiot of a daimyo surrendered his country to fire. But the thing I'm most concerned about is that Konoha has a weapon now that makes our plans for Akatsuki moot. I'm not sure I follow. Could you explain? Pain asked. What is our ultimate goal with Akatsuki? Pain and Konan exchanged looks. World peace. That's correct. And while you and I and the other members of Akatsuki do not agree on the means, we agree on the ends and we agree on certain preconditions. One of them is the destruction of the power of the hidden villages, especially the 5 great powers of the shinobi world. Yet, here we stand. Konoha has a doomsday weapon that is as powerful as anything we ever wanted to build. From the sparse intel we have on it, it seems that they can deploy the weapon anywhere and scale it as they want. Pain nodded. It's going to be a headache dealing with the fallout, I'll admit, but it's not the end of the world. I believe our plan can be salvaged yet. In that case, you're more optimistic than I, Madara responded. The problem here is that Konoha has demonstrated that nuclear weapons are practical. No one knows right now how they managed it, but I bet you $1,000,000 ryu that the thought running through every daimyo's and kage's mind is, how do I develop a similar capability? So, even if we gather all the bijou and build your doomsday weapon, it'll be just one among many and Akatsuki'll be just another player in the game. The status quo would not change, and where would that leave our plans for world peace? If the thing were easy, it would have been done a long time back, Pain retorted. We need to get concrete intel on how Konoha built their weapon. Until then, we won't know for sure whether they can reproduce it as their propaganda claims. And if they can, then yes, my plan is moot. But that's why as contingencies, we have so many other plans, including the one you favor. And whatever happens, including the scenario where Konoha's weapon is reproducible and the other elemental nations can discover the mechanics themselves, we have a few years while they do. That gives us more than enough time to capture the bijou and execute our plans. Assuming that Konoha doesn't take us out. Yes, assuming Konoha or any of the other villages don't take us out. But I'm not too worried on that front. Even if we're unfortunate and Konoha wins this war, they'll need time to consolidate their gains and everyone else will be busy preparing for war. Certainly, all players will out of necessity step lightly until they're confident of their strength. Madara closed his eyes and thought it over. Finally, after a long minute, he nodded agreement. I still believe you're entirely too optimistic and that the events of the past few weeks are going to come back to haunt us. I'm especially worried that we're underestimating Konoha's probable response against Akatsuki for reducing their cities. If I'd known they had a similar capability, I wouldn't have ordered you to destroy their city as a terror weapon, but I did not, and I did. Still, so long as the location of the statue is hidden and our control of AIM from getting out, I think we'll survive. More tea? Konan asked. Yes, please, Madara replied. And I'd like a bowl of sake myself, Pain added. Konan poured out their drinks quickly and turned to Madara. So, what do we do? There are several things we need to do, actually. Off the top of my mind, we must send Sasori into fire to gather intel on Konoha's weapon. Further, we need to start tracking the Jinchurikis as well as identify the locations of the 1 and 2 tails. We must ensure that whatever happens, AIM and Akatsuki's connection to AIM are not exposed. We also need. Kakashi, it was good of you to find the time to meet us. We're grateful that you could clear your calendar in the middle of a war to hear our concerns, Kohara said. Kakashi nodded amiably, even though it wasn't his choice to meet the late Sandame's old teammates and advisors. He'd been avoiding the meeting for 2 weeks now, but there were only so many excuses one could make, and by this point, his secretary had just about made all of them. My door is always open to Konoha's elders. Tea? He asked. We prefer sake, actually, Hamura answered for both. Sake it is. I'll have Kuno fetch them, Kakashi said, ringing the bell for his assistant. Chunin Kuno entered the Hokage's relaxation room, so named because it was attached to the Hokage's office, and it was a place where the Hokage could retreat to relax from the stresses of their office or meet and greet powerful and important visitors in a less formal atmosphere in response to his summons. Yes, Godaima-sama. Please bring us 2 bowls of hot sake and green tea. Also send out a summons to Jounin Commander Shikaku to join us at his convenience. Yes, sir, the Chunin said and withdrew. Kakashi turned back to his visitors and nodded towards the window and the wide open beyond. It's a pleasant weather that we're having these last few days, isn't it? He asked. He wanted to steer the conversation in a harmless direction by making small talk until Shikaku joined him. Koharu smiled. I much prefer the weather at this time of the year be a little less cloudy, but yes, the weather has been pleasant. They stuck with the small talk until Shikaku joined them a few minutes later. As Jounin Commander, the Nara's office was just down the hall. He'd been in the middle of a meeting himself before he was summoned. Shikaku, please be seated, Kakashi said. Elders Hamura and Koharu are here to air their concerns on the subject of Naruto's and Team 7's continued failure to return to the village. I see, the Jounin Commander said, nodding as if the subject was new to him. He turned to face the 2 elders. It's been 2 months since your boy destroyed Kusa, Kakashi, Hamura addressed the Godame. Why hasn't he and his teammates come home? Why aren't they responding to your orders? I appreciate your concern, Elder Hamura, and I hope my explanation will go towards putting your fears to rest. Pause. The problem is that the demands of campaigning for the last 3 years running has pushed my kids to the brink. They're battle-fatigued and the last 2 missions that I had assigned them didn't exactly help. It's my fault, I suppose, for not noticing the signs sooner, but fighting strength criminals while operating alone in a hostile country where they were, for all practical purposes, abandoned did not help the issue. This was quickly followed by the late Sandaime's death, their victory at Wind, and their mission to destroy Kusa. This combination of events and the stressful environment has broken the proverbial camel's back. Which is just a fancy way of saying your kids couldn't take it and they're AWOL. Do you even know where they are? Koharu asked. Kakashi looked at Shikaku. Jiraiya had mailed him as soon as Team 7 reached his camp, but it was better to have the Jounin Commander allay the Sandaime's teammates' fears on that front. He suspected that they wouldn't believe him. Unless he shared Team 7's current location with them. And if they did, they'd throw a big fit for allowing his kids to remain at a camp that was surrounded by hostile forces. We know where they are, elders. Their exact location is a secret, of course, but rest assured that we're getting daily updates about their status, the Nara replied. Hamura nodded and Koharu leaned forward. And what is their status? She asked. Sasuke and Sakura are functional. Naruto is recovering. It might be another month or so before he can safely return to duty. This lull in fighting is a godsend for them and us. Can your boy do the same to another city should the need arise? Hamura asked. Or are there others who know the technique he used? Not in the condition he is right now, but yes, there's no physical reason why he shouldn't be able to do it to another city. Psychologically, we don't have the information to be sure. Whatever profile we had is ruined because of his current condition. I believe that he will, if asked, though he might require justification of our orders. As to whether the technique is usable by others, I believe so, elders. The technique is stored in our Forbidden Jutsu library, and while no one else knows it right now, given sufficient time, any reasonably skilled shinobi should be able to do it. Provided they can supply the chakra needed to fire the technique, of course. Hamura and Koharu shot glances at each other and rose from their seats. That we can live with. Thanks again for sparing the time to listen to us, Kakashi. It was my pleasure, elders, Kakashi said pleasantly as he rang up Kuno and asked the Chunin to show the two oldsters out. Once the door was closed behind them, he turned to Shikaku and with a yawn, massaged his eyes. That should keep them happy for a week, I should think. A week and a half at most, I should think, the Nara replied with a wry smile. He had dark circles under his eyes himself. Sobering, he said, would be a lot happier myself if Team 7 were somewhere inside our territory or at least not trapped in a camp surrounded by pissed-off Iwa and Kusa Nin. So would I, Kakashi confessed, but I'm not sure Sasuke and Sakura will obey an order to move Naruto out of the camp if I gave it. Which is why I haven't ordered them. We used up those kids, you think? Shikaku asked. That'd be a tragedy for Konoha and the three teens. Battle fatigue in your early teens ruined your life and it was the rare afflicted Nin who saved themselves from having their lifespan cut short. That was the personal tragedy. Konoha could use Team 7's skills and talents such as theirs showed up maybe once in a generation, and the way things had been shaping up, it looked like those skills were just about lost, which was Leaf's tragedy. At least, the Sannin and the Yondaime had a chance to train the next generation before one sacrificed his life, another took over the external intelligence network, and the other two were used up. From where Shikaku stood, it increasingly looked like Kakashi's students wouldn't even get that chance. I hope not, Kakashi sighed. It'd be my fault entirely if they are. Needs of the war, Kakashi. Still, it is a damn shame. Kakashi nodded. You really think that someone else can master Naruto's technique? Shikaku asked. Not an individual by himself, no, the Godame replied, but a team acting together should. Shikaku thought it over and conceded the point. Very likely yes. How are the talks with Wind coming along? There's a lot of gnashing of teeth in their camp, right now. Unlike last time, however, we don't have our own internal troubles to export to them, and we're trying to strike a fair deal in the interests of securing peace in the long term so they're cooperating. It helps that we hold so many hostages from their anti-Hai no Kuni faction. So long as the Wind border with us is stable, it's a good thing for us. Very, Kakashi acquiesced. My biggest headache these days is Danzo. Shikaku, who was privy to that compartment, shook his head. The man is devoted to ensuring Konoha's supremacy, but has an one-track mind that can't see any path but the direct, he said. Too bad he's a slave to his ambitions and his ambition requires he sit in your seat. I'm worried about the support he has started to enjoy in Konoha again, Kakashi confessed. You have more supporters and more influential ones at that, the Nara pointed out. Quite. I'm not afraid of Danzo posing a direct challenge to the seat. I'm afraid that the support is going to make him even more of an idiot with respect to his ambition. Possibly. But since he and his unit are in Rice facing Kumo, their skills at assassination and ambushes are well suited for the campaign there. I'm sure its needs will keep him focused on the job at hand until we reach an arrangement with Kumo. Afterwards? Kakashi asked in a pique. He knew the answer, but he felt anger flash at Danzo and his continued stupidity on the issue of coveting the Hokage's seat. Afterwards is afterwards. Danzo could die of natural causes or be killed by an assassin before we negotiate a peace with Kumo. If he survives, his troops are bound to be weakened with the order you've given Enko to use them up and we can take him out. Covertly or overtly. If we have peace and we have to act openly, the loss of his unit shouldn't hurt our readiness levels all that much. Not with the way things are shaping up in T. Kakashi smiled at the mention of T. The country that had been a pain in the ass for the past 3 years was now overwhelmingly pro-Hai no Kuni after the destruction of their capital and the valiant defense mounted to stave off that destruction by Leaf Nin. Akatsuki couldn't have screwed up worse on that front. All right, Shikaku, I concede, the Godame said. I wanted to talk to you about our readiness for an offensive on the Kusa front as well. How are the supplies of Kabuto's wonder weapons? Naruto wasn't good at shogi. It was a good thing that his opponent wasn't a great player himself. To make the resultant game even worse, Naruto had the annoying habit of taking too long to plot his moves, and so did his counterpart. Still, there was nothing much to do in a camp under siege. As a result, even the shitty game being played in the medical tent had attracted half a dozen recovering shinobi with nothing better to do with their time, as there was only one shogi board around. Naruto's opponent, an experienced operator named Jin, was recovering from a mild case of chakra exhaustion. His squad had been ambushed by one of Iwa's Jinchurikis a few days back during a patrol. They'd fought their ambushers to a standstill and retreated in good order without loss of life. One member had been badly burned, however, and had to be evacuated to Konoha after a respectable price had been paid to the toads. The others had suffered mild injuries with the exception of Jin, who'd been at point. He had engaged the Jinchuriki and bought time for the others to respond to the ambush. The Toad Sannin had built a fortress on a small hill overlooking one of the 3 wagon-worthy roads to the front line once the combined forces of Iwa and Kusa commenced their retreat to the grass border. His rationale had been to strangle a major supply line to the front, slowing down troop build-up as well as defense preparations and forcing the enemy to commit frontline troops to ensuring security in the rear. Normally, Jiraiya wouldn't have tried such a risky tactic under ordinary circumstances. While his unit threatened a major supply line, the fact remained that they were cut off from support themselves and heavily outnumbered. But his unit was made of experienced blooded operators who were also skilled in the use of seals of power, and leaf forces on the front had been weak when he made the decision. The troops on the front had been significantly reinforced since in preparation for Fire's first offensive on the Kusa front, and the Jiraiya's unit had been strengthened by the addition of 2 platoons of Leaf ANBU specializing in tracking and assassination. The ANBU had smuggled themselves in through the front lines while it had been leaky with the enemy in retreat. Not to be outdone, and in response to the threat posed by Jiraiya's unit to the surrounding countryside, the enemy had camped 2 companies of elite Iwa and Kusa troops up and down the road. Since both sides patrolled aggressively, there had been 2 battles a week on average for the past month and a half. So far, the Leaf Nin had inflicted a disproportionate share of the casualties and forced Iwa to withdraw one of their Jinchurikis from the front. Naruto, for his part, did not care about the tactical situation or the dangers faced by his comrades. He understood they were all in a high-threat environment, but the part of his brain that used to care seemed to have been turned off. These days, his attention focused on his games. Today, his focus was even more intent as he was losing the game badly. For the first month after he'd destroyed Kusa following his sensei's orders, he hadn't bothered to talk much, if at all. He ate if someone fed him, and he slept a sleep filled with nightmares. He hadn't cared for games, human company, or even Sasuke and Sakura. Now, with 2 months between him and the massacre, he was slowly getting back to normal. It still didn't feel right to hold a kunai or a shuriken in his hand, but his dreams weren't always so horrible, and he woke up screaming only once or twice a night. This was arguably a huge improvement over the first month. "Your move, Jin," Naruto said, moving a piece. He'd thought about conceding the game. He was 3 moves away from defeat, but if he quit, someone else would take the board and he'd have to wait several hours before he could get it back. Perhaps he could start a bet on the next game? Itachi peered at the map supplied by the Iwa captain. The beautifully drawn map contained bare minimum terrain details, but described the spots where Iwa or Kusa patrols had encountered their Leaf counterparts in the last 1.5 months. The dates of the various encounters were neatly scribbled alongside the markings, and though there had no discernible pattern to the patrols, he and Kisame had set up near a spot where there had been 3 skirmishes to date and waited in ambush. Today was the 4th day at the ambush position, and so far, no Leaf unit had wandered into the area for a shellacking. As waiting in prepared ambushes went, this wasn't anything out of the ordinary. He and Kisame would wait another couple of days, and if things didn't pan out at their current spot, they would relocate to another likely ambush location and try their luck again. They had all the time in the world, after all, and had only to destroy a Konoha squad once or twice to put Jiraiya's unit on the back foot. Sasuke pushed aside the flap of the command post tent and walked in with a nod to those already gathered. Sighting her teammate, Sakura sidled up to him and grabbed the bowl of hot soup and spoon he bore in his hands. The Uchiha scion gave up the dish without complaint. He knew that Sakura had been busy preparing poisons and antidotes for most of the day and was likely famished. "Good of you to join us, Sasuke," Jiraiya greeted. "We were discussing the route for a reinforced patrol that we want to use to spring an enemy ambush and annihilate their troops. I was hoping that you and Sakura would like to join the hunt." Sasuke shrugged. He was excited by the thought of possible battle after a month spent cooped up in the camp taking care of Naruto. "I'm game," the raven-haired teen said. Then, casting a glance at his teammate, "Don't know about Sakura though, as she's likely tired from working with chemicals." "I'm definitely in," the Haruno replied hotly, shooting her friend a dirty look. He should have known better than to question her readiness for duty. Sasuke smiled sickly and shot an apologetic look at the kunoichi. He knew he was going to suffer for his mistake in their next spar. Jiraiya ignored the byplay, concentrating on the map spread on the table. "Here's the planned route for this patrol," he said, tracing a line drawn on the map. "The squad leaders and I decided on this route because it takes you close to 3 spots where there have been multiple ambushes so far. Your operational orders are simple. Follow the route, and if you encounter an enemy unit or an ambush, engage the enemy or spring the ambush. Destroy the opposition and withdraw with your prisoners and wounded. Do not continue with the patrol after the first encounter. If you're significantly outnumbered, retreat back to base in fighting order. We'll try our luck again another day. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," everyone answered in chorus. They were half an hour into their patrol when Sakura felt the 2 powerful and suppressed chakras waiting in ambush up ahead 100 yards into the copse of trees that lay alongside their patrol route. She immediately signaled a halt and communicated the likely numbers and disposition of the enemy to the others. "I'll take point," Sasuke murmured to the patrol leader. "You sure?" the man asked. "Yes. I'll go in with my Sharingan active under a Genjutsu. I'll spring the ambush and your squad can counterattack." The patrol leader turned to Sakura. "I'll support from range. I'm the only decent medic in the camp and I'm very good at Genjutsu. If the situation requires I play a direct combatant role, I'll do that." "All right. Shed your non-combat load, people. Take a drink and set out in 2. Itachi sensed the chakra signatures approaching at a steady pace and tapped his dozing partner's shoulders to wake him. He signaled the strength of the patrol, which had more numbers than a typical Konoha patrol, to Kisame. Then it was just a matter of waiting patiently until the suspicious Leaf Nin walked into the kill zone. It is an understatement to say that Itachi was surprised when his younger brother walked into the ambush zone a few minutes later. Sasuke and his team had disappeared off the face of the earth a couple of months back, but Akatsuki Command had merely assumed they'd been pulled back to the rear for rest and recuperation after their successful and historical campaign in Kaze no Kuni. Still, even surprised, there was only one thing to do, and without a word of warning to Kisame, Itachi shunshined in front of Sasuke himself. "Hello, little brother. How are you?" the elder Uchiha asked, his Sharingan spinning in a blur as he made eye contact with his sibling. Kisame appeared beside his teammate a second later. He appeared miffed. This wasn't how the ambush was supposed to go. "Kisame," Itachi spoke before his partner could complain. "I have a long overdue discussion to conduct with my brother. Could you take care of the others and ensure we're undisturbed?" The blue-skinned swordsman chuckled laughter and hefted his sword. He stepped a pace forward, cajoling his prey as he did. "Come out, little Leaf Nin. We are Further speech was impossible as Itachi severed his spinal cord with a precise jab into his partner's neck. Kisame's sword screeched as its owner fell dead, pushing chakra into his body to initiate the healing process. But all the healing in the world cannot reconstruct a severed spine so long as the blade is stuck in the spinal column. I'm glad that you finally know the truth about our clan, Sasuke, Itachi spoke in a measured voice as his partner expired at his feet. Sasuke held up an arm to signal his comrades to hold their position and stepped toward his brother. I forgive you your sins, big brother. A month later. Oi Temu, the younger step-brother of the late daimyo of Hai no Kuni and one of the claimants to the throne of the land, walked into the room with his consort the Lady Anano Sarara. Ibiki and his companion, who'd been enjoying a cup of tea while waiting for their hosts, stood up and bowed to the noble usurper. Good evening, Lord and Lady, greeted Ibiki. Temu nodded, imperiously. He was convinced that the presence of one of the most senior members of Konoha's intelligence department indicated that the village leadership had decided to throw in their lot with him. Good evening, Ibiki. Please be seated. How are things back at the village? Do you see an end in sight to this damnable war? The torture expert made himself comfortable and started his briefing. Oi Temu listened carefully, asking such questions as were pertinent, and they spent the next hour in small talk and discussion on the course of the war. How may we help you today, Jounin Ibiki? Temu asked at the end of the hour. Ibiki and his companion exchanged glances. We're here on the subject of your claim to the throne. Temu raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. It really wasn't. For the past month, messengers from Konoha had met each of the other claimants to the throne and had conveyed Konohagakura's refusal to support their claims. Temu was the last remaining contender, and it stood to reason that the Leaf Shinobi would send someone to meet him and announce their support for his faction. And what is your leadership stance on the subject? He asked. The Geodaime expresses his regret that he will not be able to support your claim to the throne. Temu's mouth snapped open and remained stuck in that position. If not me, then who else? The Lord asked. It's become common knowledge that the Hokage had rejected everyone else. Konohagakure are not supporting anyone at this point in time, Ibiki explained. Do you shinobi think that you can seize power for yourselves? The noble houses will not stand to be commanded by a bunch of ninja, Temu retorted. Geodaime Hatake Kakashi isn't interested in the Fire Throne. It certainly looks like he is from where I stand. I'll have you know that I'll not stand for it. A murderous thug for hire on my brothers on my throne. Once again, Lord, the Geodaime isn't interested in the Fire Throne. Well, I won't let him have it. I'll gather the nobles and crush your village first, Temu snarled. And this is why Konohagakure refuses to back you. You would start a civil war in the middle of a war on which hinges Hai no Kuni's survival, Ibiki's companion accused the Lord. Ibiki held up his hand to silence his colleague. Let us not let passion cloud our judgments, Hideyoshi, the ANBU commander said. To Temu, he said, my companion perhaps spoke out of turn, Lord, but his words have truth behind them. That you and the others would push the country towards civil war when our forces were fighting on 3 fronts doesn't speak well of any of your leadership abilities. Temu mastered himself with difficulty. Get out of my house, he ground out his words. I'll see your Hokage before the Council of Nobles. Actually, Ibiki replied pleasantly, you won't. We conveyed one part of the Geodaime's message. We did not convey the other. Well then, Sira, have your say and get the hell out of my house. It is simply this, Lord. You will send your wife, your parents and kids to Konohagakure with us where our forces will be able to ensure their safety. You would take hostages and blackmail me. Please, Lord. Blackmail is such a strong word. Let us not use it. We're better men than that, Ibiki smiled. Samurai walked into the room from multiple doors, drawn by their master's angry words. It's out of the question. Now, get out or I'll have my retainers throw you out. You sure you want that, Lord? Ibiki asked, smiling still. If he was bothered by the mass of armed men standing at his back with drawn swords, it wasn't evident. Temu's eyes narrowed. If something untoward were to happen to me and my friend, the ANBU commander continued, there would be an unfortunate incident at your home tonight. Sadly, one of our ninja would have gone rogue. The pressure of continuous war for 3 years getting to him, you see, and there'll be no survivors. Why, the shinobi would be so overwrought he would kill everything down to the rats. I'm sure we do not want that. You wouldn't dare. Actually, I think that the poor insane bastard might rape your wife and your daughter. She is 8, I believe, and way too young for such things. So, it would be a pity. And sell them to a pimp in Kaze no Kuni. And you know how much the folks in Wind hate fire nobles right now. Sad, really. Konan found her friend frowning over an intelligence report in his study. Pine-sama, is anything the matter? Nagato stirred and cast a questioning eye at his companion. You were so immersed in the report that you lost situational awareness, Konan explained. I was reading this communique from IWA from their intelligence head. He gestured at the unfurled scroll on the desk. She is worried that there's been no update from either Itachi or Kisame for months now and concerned that there's been no report of mass casualties among the Leaf Nin under Jiraiya's command. Konan took a seat and pored over the message herself. I'm not seeing any cause for concern. These things tend to take time. Payne nodded. I agree, absolutely. The delay could be caused by any number of reasons. One of the cell members could have fallen ill, for example, and they could be lying low until they're combat ready. Yes. I'm not worried about that. Both Itachi and Kisame are very dependable. Far more so than any of our other cells. So, what is it that has you worried? The forces arrayed against IWA and Kusa on High no Kuni front grow in strength even as we speak, while our nominal allies have to deal with a shattered supply line and insecure rear as well lost momentum and morale. I hate to say it, but it looks increasingly likely that the Land of Fire will survive the war. There wasn't anything Konan could say about that, so she kept her counsel to herself. It is decided then, Inoichi gestured at the other 2 men in the room. The intelligence head had smuggled himself into Jiraiya's little fortress on the Kusa hill after news of Itachi's unplanned return to the fold. He'd then spent the next few weeks carefully debriefing the Konoha's mole in Akatsuki, and the result had been an intelligence coup as good or better than the windfall from Oto or the defection of Kabuto. A brainstorming session at the end of those briefings had been a plan that had the potential to pull the carpet from under the rogue organization's feet. Jiraiya and Itachi nodded without hesitation. I'll brief the Hokage, the Yamanaka clan leader informed the others. I see no reason why he should reject it. We've all been aching to get our claws on Akatsuki, and this is by far the best plan towards that end. The only practical and reasonable plan, to be perfectly honest. I would disagree with that, Itachi responded. While it's true that there's no way to infiltrate Rain without Payne's cognizance, it is also true that Konoha has something that Akatsuki need. I'm sure you can work with the required people to leak information about Shikaku's location and spring an ambush when my organization sends people to collect the beast. There is that, Inoichi agreed, but I'm afraid it won't get the political traction we need to implement it anywhere in our territory or that of our allies. Everyone knows what happened the last time Akatsuki thought they had a lead on the Shikaku, and no one's going to want to risk another repeat of T Capital. Ergo, that's neither practical nor reasonable. Itachi nodded understanding. Even a genius never stops learning, and he'd just learnt something new. Arguably, he'd never get to use it. Making policy and playing politics were not part of his job description, but he filed it away just the same. He would not be half the shinobi he was if he learnt only those things that he considered pertinent to the immediate job. So, the village's hopes rest on my forlorn hope? He asked. Inoichi smiled and shook his head. Need to know, Itachi-san. And you do not have need to know. My apologies, Itachi responded. The question had been impertinent and unwise. What he did not know, he could not divulge if his mission failed and he was captured, after all. I guess this concludes today's session, Jiraiya pronounced. Inoichi, how about the three of us share a drink? Will wonders never cease? Colonel Seigo Takamori, commanding officer, 3rd Restoration Brigade, observed as the last of the inbound high-value shipment of material was delivered to his unit. Logistics are actually meeting their delivery commitments for once. Lieutenant Colonel Beppu Shinsuke, Takamori's executive officer, scowled and punched his right fist into his left palm. His ancestral home was in territory captured by the invaders, and though his family and closest retainers had escaped the pillaging and rapine, most of the common folks that were his responsibility to protect had not. Screw wonders, he barked gruffly, this means we get to kill them Iwa and Kusa wogs and stack them up sky high. Patience, friend, Takamori counseled, we still have a few more weeks to go before we can go about kicking the invaders out of our land. The rest of the assault brigades to be similarly replenished still, and the shinobi and regular army reinforcements aren't at their staging points for the offensive yet. 3rd Restoration Brigade was camped 15 miles from the Iwa Kusa frontline, where Hai no Kuni slowly built up the forces for their first offensive action on this front. The area was heavily patrolled by roving bands of shinobi and samurai as troops and material were moved into staging areas under heavy guard. 3rd Restoration behavior had been pulled back from the Kaze no Kuni border, where they hadn't seen any action, and earmarked as one of the advance elements of the attack. For all that Takamori counseled patience with his XO, the colonel was still pissed that his war with Wind and the chance for glory said war brought had sputtered out with a whimper against the actions of Konoha's 3 Flames. Hopefully, things would go better on this front and he would have a chance to lead his brigade into combat. Yes, Shinsuke agreed. The cold smile that lit his face as he spoke was that of a starved predator contemplating prey. We'll get a chance to thank the Tsuchi army for their abstinence in holding captured ground through ever-increasing deprivations in the face of our inevitable onslaught. Mitokado Hamura stared impassively at the Kaminari no Kuni representative as their underlings explained pleasantries and slowly warmed up to the subject over the course of an hour. Hamura, who was more than 70 years old, was a past master at this game owing to his extensive experience as a liaison with the samurai clans of Hai no Kuni. Hell might freeze over, but he wasn't going to break eye contact or blink first, though his eyes hurt like you wouldn't believe. Thankfully, before the pain got to be too much for him to bear, the Kaminari contingent finally got around to raising the subject of this meeting. Hamura smiled grimly at his opposing member. It is indeed regrettable that Kusa had to be wiped off the map, but so was the destruction of T Capital, he pointed out. The lightning noble nodded, a grave and discomfited expression etched on his visage. Kaminari no Kuni censures the rogue organization Akatsuki for their actions in T, he acknowledged. Hamura waited patiently for the other to continue. We saddened by the loss of life and the destruction of the 2 cities, the nobleman reiterated. My lord and master, the Honorable Daimyo of Kaminari no Kuni wants to ensure that such tragedies are avoided in the future at all costs. Ah, thought Hamura. That's why they called for this meeting. He'd wondered whether Lightning wanted to raise the subject of the captured two-tailed Jinchuriki, but apparently, the destruction of Kusa and the implications for all elemental nations rankled the Kaminari no Kuni ruler more. The septuagenarian sat up straighter. The revelation of the agenda changed everything. Lightning was the first nation to initiate a formal conversation on the destruction of Kusa, and if he played things right, Fire stood to gain quite a bit. The Honorable Daimyo is wise. But how may we help you? Hai no Kuni must preserve the ability to defend ourselves against the indiscriminate use of such weapons. So long as the world remains the way it is, and so long as other actors, be they state-sponsored or states acting alone or together, hold and control similar weapons, my nation needs such a capability for self-defense. The samurai lord nodded as if he understood Fire Country's predicament. I'm sure that you'll do what's right for your country and your people. As my lord and master will do what's good for his, the samurai responded after a moment's consideration. Hamura mentally translated. The response was a carefully worded threat. The Lightning Daimyo and Cloud's Kage were officially giving notice to Fire that a repeat performance of their doomsday weapon would not be tolerated. The people of Hai no Kuni have the highest regard for the daimyo of Kaminari no Kuni. His wisdom is known to one and all, the Konoha diplomat responded without batting an eye. Translation: Your people have no need to fear me and mine. As my lord and master would say, even monkeys fall from trees. Translation: Words are well and good, but anyone can make a mistake. What's the guarantee that something will not go wrong? Not seeing is a flower, Hamura replied adroitly, quoting another proverb. Translation: Reality cannot compete with the power of one's imagination. There's nothing that I can say or do that you'll make you. Trust me if you're paranoid. The samurai nodded. He understood what the retired leaf shinobi was driving at. However, he had responsibilities to his people, and that meant giving birth is easier than worrying about it. Translation: It's very hard to trust because trust is so easily betrayed. Give me something solid that I can take back to my daimyo and mollify his fears. Hamura nodded and switched topics. And in the interest of not being misunderstood, he addressed the problem as he took a more direct with his initial problem statement. Hai no Kuni's environment isn't one to fill a person's head with a sense of security and confidence, he confessed. We face an existential threat with Iwa and Kusa on one direction. Then there are the unaddressed and long-festering issues on our other borders. We fall 7 times and stand up 8, but the rule of the land is as it always has been: the weak are meat, the strong eat. Translation: You talk about your daimyo losing sleep, but what about mine? We are beset by enemies on all fronts. The samurai lord brooded over Hamura's statement in silence for a few moments. Perhaps an agreement can be reached that's mutually satisfactory, he said. Translation: Maybe if we make you a bit safer by defining clear-cut boundaries for the proxy wars we fight with each other, we can reach a beneficial agreement that puts both our fears to rest. Perhaps, Hamura agreed. Translation: What do you bring to the table? Sandaime Tsuchika Janoki rolled open an empty writing scroll, pulled out his brush and nodded at his subordinates. Status of the supply situation, he asked his quartermaster. We've met the mule procurement program's goals, Sandaime-sama, though there's been a greater than expected delay between purchase and delivery. In turn, this has caused a whiplash effect in deliveries to the front. Our troops facing the enemy haven't been starving exactly, but they have been living under straitened circumstances, with most units paralyzed into defensive postures in the tactical and operational sense. You mean they aren't fit for combat operations, Anoki clarified. I guess it's a good thing that Hai no Kuni units are also unprepared, or I'd have lost an army and you'd have lost your head. The quartermaster nodded, meeting the Sandaime's glare without flinching. Logistics is the art of the possible, and his people had worked miracles to even keep the front supplied after the disaster in Kusa. Anoki sighed. My apologies, quartermaster. While you counseled that we do not retreat from our lines, it was I who made the actual decision, and responsibility for the result rests with me. How long before your people can supply enough material to the frontline troops so as to effect a change in their strategic posture? Another month, Lord. If we can reduce the Sannin Jiraiya's fort and improve internal security, we may be able to save as much as a week and a half from the effort. Anoki looked askance at his head of operations. The man shook his head in the negative. Not possible. They have strength in numbers with a far higher than normal population of powerful, blooded combatants, and they're very well dug in. You heard the man, Anoki informed his quartermaster. Then a month from now, Sandaime-sama. Anoki turned to his head of intelligence. And how long before Hai no Kuni can mount a credible defense or offense of the frontline? He asked. We estimate 5 to 6 weeks for the former and 10 weeks for the latter. They're pulling in those volunteer units armed of tradesmen and farmers armed with pikes and bows, a thin leavening of samurai to stiffen the ranks. We believe this indicates that their posture for the near future is going to be defensive in nature. So, we have time. Good. Some breathing room is all we need to crush those damnable tree-huggers. Pull out the Han and Rashi from their interdiction duties around Jiraiya's fort and move them to the front in 5 weeks. Start making movement plans, unit objectives and all that to resume the offensive in 6 weeks. Yes, Sandaime-sama. Dismissed. So, Oi Temu wants to be difficult, retired General Tetsuzan Nagata said. An old, scarred veteran survivor of 100 battles, the samurai lord was one of the most influential nobles in Hai no Kuni. Incidentally, he headed the faction that was against all 4 pretenders to the daimyo's throne. That appears to be the case, Lord, Kakashi replied. The samurai nodded and took a deep breath. Well, if that blowhard doesn't know what implacable means. Guess it's time someone taught him and the other vermin what it means. Kakashi raised an eyebrow. I'll talk to the others, Kakashi, the Tetsuzan continued. And we'll see what'll see. Of course, Lord. Thanks for bringing this to my notice. Those dirty scumbags. After the oldster left, muttering imprecations against the late daimyo's relatives, Kakashi turned to Ibiki. Hopefully, that takes care of the Lord Oi Temu and his wife. Good job and carry on, Ibiki. Morning, Itachi. The elder Uchiha brother looked up from his reading and nodded acknowledgement at his visitors. Morning, little brother. Naruto. Itachi greeted his visitors. What brings you by this morning? We heard about your plan from Jiraiya Sensei and Inoukazan. And I approve. Itachi raised an eyebrow at his brother. Better this than a seppuku in all but name with me as your second. At the very least, your death would serve a greater purpose. Seconds passed. Finally, the elder brother nodded. And you, Naruto? What are your thoughts on the subject? He asked, genuinely curious. He'd learned about Naruto's actions in Kusa during his debriefing by Yamanaka Inoichi. It was regrettable that a new generation was making the same sacrifices he had, but by this point, he looked at the Yondaime son as a kindred soul and one who'd been through enough to empathize with him. The ninja world and our way of life is thus ever saved by faceless heroes, Naruto replied in a somber tone, bowing deeply at the waist in honor of his friend's brother. Itachi looked discomfited by the gesture. We all do what we can for peace, he said. Peace in our lifetimes, Sasuke seconded. And perhaps, peace forever, Naruto appended. Later, in the day, as Team 7 were lunching together in silence, Naruto cleared his throat. Guys. Yes, Naruto, Sasuke asked. Sakura had her mouth full and only raised an eyebrow. I think we need to return to Konoha. I want to talk to Kakashi Sensei. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to like and subscribe, and don't forget to share this video with your friends. Guys, make sure to help the author by visiting the link in the description. This is Fox Sage, and I'm signing off.